And good morning once again, my brothers and sisters. What a great privilege we have today to study God's Word. And today we are in an amazing passage, 2 Samuel 21. It's really a pretty difficult passage to understand correctly, but we're going to take a shot at it this morning. I think you'll learn a lot about who God is and how when God makes a promise, not only when He Himself promises, but when His people, His covenant people, promise on His behalf. Those are locked in binding promises. Let me show you what I mean as we go to the first verse of chapter 21. During the reign of David, David's the king, we all know that. We've been tracking that all through the book. There was a famine for 3 successive years. Now, famine is something that God brings upon a people to basically move the pieces on the board. You remember, why did the Israelites, the house of Jacob, end up in Egypt? It was because of a famine. All right, so now 3 years have gone by. There's no food. It's getting harder and harder. So what does the king do? The king sought the face of the Lord. God, have we done something? Are you punishing us for some reason? What is this famine about? The Lord said, notice the Lord answers, it is on account of Saul. Okay, let's stop there a minute. Who's Saul? Well, he's the former king. Well, what are characteristics of the former king? Well, he had this habit of obeying God partially. He would do things up to a point, and then he would let his own desire take it from there. He wasn't faithful and committed to do everything God commanded all the time. All right, so that's the first reason his name comes up here in the reason the famine's happening. But the second thing is right here. Excuse me, his blood-stained house. What does that mean? Well, that tells you that this is about more than just Saul. This is also about Saul's descendants and the way they've acted as well. And then God tells him, it is because he put the Gibeonites to death. Well, what's that about? I mean, aren't the kings of Israel supposed to conquer the people and move the people into the land and get rid of the pagan idolatrous nations that occupy the land? Do you remember the Gibeonites? Well, we have to go all the way back, like some 400 years, back to Joshua chapter 9. All right? These Gibeonites know, they're also called Hivites for those of you scholars out there. They know that Israel is coming into this promised land to occupy it at the command of God, and they know that Israel has been wiping out the enemies of God as they proceed to occupy the land. So they make up a story, and they come to Joshua, and they say, look, we don't live around here, but we want you to make a treaty with us, knowing full well they do live around there. They are one of the people groups that God would remove if it was going to be just an Israelite nation. Well, they decide to make a covenant. It says there in 9:14, but they did not inquire of the Lord. They don't ask God, are these people telling us the truth about how they don't live in this land? No, they don't ask God. Instead, Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. So now we have the people of God promising not to touch the Gibeonites. All right. 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors living near them. But that is no grounds to revoke the treaty. They have made a covenant promise. God, even though he didn't want his people to make that promise, because they have made that promise, God takes that promise seriously. You know, we live in a world where one nation can make a treaty with another, and they were lying the whole time. They just tear up the piece of paper and do whatever they wanted to do. not in the ancient world, and especially not with God. A covenant is a covenant is a covenant. The treaty was made centuries before the time of David, but God didn't forget that his people promised protection to the Gibeonites. All right, so now we go back into the passage. The king summoned the Gibeonites. What are we being told by God? Well, I'm causing 3 years of famine because of what Saul did to the Gibeonites in direct opposition to what the covenant said that we had made with them. The king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not a part of Israel, but were survivors of the Amorites. The Israelites had sworn to spare them. All right, that's what we saw in Joshua 9. But Saul, in his zeal for Israel and Judah, had tried to annihilate them. So what are we told here? Saul violated the covenant. Are we told where, when, how? No. You can't really find a passage that says, and then Saul attacked the Gibeonites and wiped them out. But we're told here that that's what happened. Saul attacked the Gibeonites. So David asked the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? How shall I make amends so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance? So what's happening here? The king is saying, look, we need to make this right. We need to go seek justice. All right? How do we seek justice? The Gibeonites answered him, well, we have no right to demand silver or gold from Saul or his family. In other words, money's not going to bring us justice, nor do we have the right to put anyone in Israel to death. Well, what do you want me to do for you? David asked. Look at verse 5. They answered the king, as for the men who destroyed us and plotted against us, so that we have been decimated and have no place anywhere in Israel. In other words, through Saul and through his descendants, we have been displaced, decimated, wiped out against the covenant that we made with you and your God. They say, let 7 of his male descendants be given to us to be killed and exposed before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul. What? 7 of his descendants. 7 people from the house of Saul. We're going to execute them. Now, people look at this and go, well, that's just crazy. Why would you do that? But understand that in the justice system of that day, retribution was an obvious resolution. They are going to punish the house of Saul for what Saul did to them. It tells us a couple things. That in this case, we see God is moving heaven and earth through famine to reveal the sin. When the sin is revealed, David moves to reconcile and bring resolution. But that process involves retribution in this case. All right? So, that's what we want. So the king said, I'll give them to you. Now the king spared Mephibosheth. You remember that's the son of Jonathan. All right? David's friend. Okay, so we're not going to give you Mephibosheth, okay, son of Saul, because of the oath. Remember, David had promised Mephibosheth that he was going to be at the king's table until he died. So because of the oath before the Lord between David and Jonathan, son of Saul, Mephibosheth is off the table in terms of being a part of this retributive justice. All right, well, who's going to die? But the king took Armani and Mephibosheth. That's another guy, not the one we've been focused on throughout 2 Samuel up to this point. This Mephibosheth is the son of Ahaz. He's the daughter of Rizpah. I want you to, the 2 sons of Ahaz's daughter, that's what I'm trying to say, Rizpah. Now, you need to pay attention to this lady, because she's going to come up later in the chapter. So 2 of her sons are selected to experience judgment. This is from the house of Saul, not just from Saul's action, but from his whole house. Remember what it said. They've been wiping out the Gibeonites. Okay. So, Then there's 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab, whom she had borne to Adriel, son of Barzillai. This is a different Barzillai than the guy we've been watching in the passage beforehand, the Maholathite. Okay, so there's 7 guys selected. He handed them over to the Gibeonites, who killed and exposed them on a hill before the Lord. All 7 of them fell together. They were put to death during the first days of the harvest, just as the barley harvest was beginning. So retribution, justice, capital punishment is given to these 7 who have been a part of. We assume that they're not innocent bystanders based on the fact that we're told that the whole house of Saul is involved in this. All right? Covenant violation. Covenant violation by God's people that weren't supposed to make the covenant, but once the covenant was made, it was made, and now we need to keep it because we promised. That's how important covenants are to God. So Rizpah, the mother of 2 of them, daughter of Ahiah, took sackcloth and spread it out for herself on a rock. From the beginning of the harvest till the rain poured down from the heavens on the bodies, she did not let the birds of the air touch them by day, or the wild animals by night. So here we have the mother that's lost 2 out of the 7. She's not going to allow their bodies to be desecrated by nature, by what the birds might want to do, by what the wild animals want to do. What does she do? She takes sackcloth and she spreads it out on the rock, and she's on 24/7 guard. And maybe for a long time, from the time that this event occurred until the rains come. And the rains might also be a sign, just a little side trail, that the famine is over. All right, that God has responded. When David was told of what Ahiah's daughter Rizpah had done, again, this lady is mentioned just a few times, but here she is. She's called Saul's concubine here. When David understands what she's done, what happens? He went and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabesh Gilead. They had taken them secretly from the public square of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them after they struck Saul down on Gilboa. Okay, so what are we doing? We're rounding up the house of Saul, even though the participants are dead. Let's go get the ashes and the bones of Saul and Jonathan. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there, and the bones of those who had been killed and exposed were gathered up. So now we have 9 people, Saul, Jonathan, and the 7. All right? Their remains are now in David's control. They buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the tomb of Saul's father Kish at Zelah in Benjamin. They did everything the king commanded. Okay, so now at least the dead, even though they died for forsaking the covenant of God, they're handed a burial that has honor, a place. They're not left out exposed. And it says after that, God answered prayer in behalf of the land. So God took covenant so seriously that the violation by Saul is punished. Interesting, isn't it? Interesting. Once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. Now, as we end this chapter, we're going to find 4 victories, because we're getting ready to end 2 Samuel. We're getting ready to say goodbye to David. And in fact, in 22, we'll see his psalm of praise. But this is listed just to help us understand that God gains victory through King David. God endorses King David. God provides, protects, keeps King David in power. And now we're told of some of the victories. Not necessarily the whole story, just the victory. Once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and he became exhausted. The king is tired. Well, he's not a young man anymore, is he? And Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels and who was armed with a new sword, said he would kill David. So this guy, Ishbi-Benob, says, hey, look, David's over there exhausted. I'm going to kill him. Once again, we see God intervene, but Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to David's rescue. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. And then David's men swore to him, saying, never again will you go out with us to battle, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished. Hey, listen, David, we can handle it. Stay home. This is a critical piece in the story, because now the baton is being passed to the descendants of David. All right? David is starting to be removed from the sequence of events. In the course of time, there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob. At that time, Shebbekai the Hushathite killed Zaph, one of the descendants of Rapha. In another battle with the Philistines at Gob, Elihana, son of Ihare Oregim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite. Not the same Goliath David killed, but a different Goliath, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. In still another battle which took place at Gath, there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He also was descended from Rapha. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shimea, David's brother, killed him. These 4 were descendants of Rapha and Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men. These huge guys, seasoned warriors, are eliminated by David's men. Okay, what do we know about this? Well, it takes I take great comfort in the fact that God honors his covenant. But we should also take great warning here that God honors the covenant that his people make as well. They're not going to be let off just because one of their leaders does the wrong thing. Justice. God demands justice. Someday judgment will belong to us as well on that day when he calls us all to his judgment seat. We need to remember we live with a God that's holy, perfect, righteous, and does what is right all the time. God bless you, church. Serve him well today.
Who is it who for sinners shed his blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus. But do you know who he is? He's the image of the invisible God, and he's the brightness of his glory, the first, the last, the future, the past. He is God.